Hi, and welcome to the second Java programming tutorial. In this tutorial, we will learn about variables and types in Java. We will also create a temperature converter program to demonstrate these concepts. Variables are items of data that have an identifier, which is a name given to them, and a value. Variable names are subject to some conventions. They usually take the form of a word, and they state that they start with a lowercase letter. If the variable name consists of two or more words, each word should begin with a capital letter. These conventions are just there for guidance. You don't have to use them, but using them makes your code more readable and maintainable. So for instance, you can have a variable name value that starts with a lowercase letter. You can also have a variable myValue, which starts with a lowercase letter, and the word value is the second word in this variable name, so it begins with a capital letter. You could also start the word with a capital letter. This is not following conventions. But these two here, Java is case sensitive. So variable names that are the same letters but different in case, so uppercase and lowercase, do not point to the same variable. So these two are completely different variable names. So as you can see, variable names are quite flexible. You can do almost anything you want with them. Java will accept even unreasonably long variable names such as that. Doesn't mean much, but the compiler will accept it. The one thing it won't accept though is variable names given after some of the keywords like public and static and class and stuff like that. You're not allowed to use those as variable names because they're reserved for the keywords of the language. So let's move on to talking more about variables. Variables have to be declared before they are used. Now, declaring a variable just tells the compiler what kind of data you're storing in the variable, and this makes use of types. Java is what is known as statically typed, so this means that all variables must have a fixed type. And the type just illustrates what sort of data is stored inside this variable. So there are different types that you can have in Java. You can have an int. There is a long, which is double the size of an int. You can have a float, a double, which is a double precision float, boolean, true or false, string. There's many more, including your own defined types, which we'll talk about later. So to initialize a variable, first you need the type, so I'm going to call it an int. You need the variable name, I'm going to call it count. The semicolon at the end to terminate the statement. Now, variables also need to be assigned a value so they can use them properly. The equal sign is the assignment operator. So we can say that count is equal to 5. So that is an assignment statement. You're saying that the value of count is equal to 5 here. Now let me just make another variable. Also, when you're initializing variables, you can go so there's a second count. You can do that in 2 separate lines, but if it's the same type, you can separate it with commas like that. So it makes the code a little bit more concise and compact. Assignment statements can also use other variables, so you can make count equal to count2 plus 1 or something along those lines. And also you can use the variable in its own assignment, so you can do count equals count plus 1. So that's how you assign the variables. It's well to note that you can combine the declaration and the assignment statements into one statement, so you can say int count equals count2 plus 1, as long as count2 is initialized. If it's not, you will get an error. So coming back to this statement here, the count equals count plus 1, there are some shorthand operators that you can use to make your code a little bit shorter. In this case, count equals count plus 1, all you're doing is adding 1 to the value that's in the count variable. This can be used like this. The plus plus operator tells the compiler that you need to increment this value. So those two statements, the count equals count plus 1 and the count plus plus, are equivalent. This also works for taking one away, so if I had count equals count minus 1, I can use count minus minus, and that will decrement count variable. Now, instead of +1, if we had count equals count +5, then we can't simply do count plus. Well, we could do it 5 times, but there's another way you can do it. It's easier. The plus equals operator tells the compiler to increment the value that's currently in the count by the number on the right hand side. So that will then increment that by 5. There are also similar operators for taking away, multiplying, and dividing, and there are some others that we'll cover later. So now that you've learned the basics of variables and types in Java, we should jump into a program which will convert a temperature from Fahrenheit to Celsius. So let's do that now. I've already got a project called temperature set up in the Eclipse IDE. If you watched my first video, you will have learned how to do this. If not, be sure to check it out. So there's a class button up the top, by the way, in some versions of the Eclipse IDE that allows you to create a class without right-clicking the project and selecting new package. Right, so this is quite a good example. For some reason, the source folder here is empty. I'm not sure exactly why that's happened, but if that happens, just click Browse and put it in the source package inside your project that you want to place your class. So there we go. So our name is going to be temperature converter, and you'll see this looks very familiar to the one before. So first we need our main method. This will be familiar with your string args in the brackets. Then let's put our use of variables to, well, let's put it to good use. Let's make a variable that is an int value, and we'll call it far. This represents the degrees in Fahrenheit. So let's make it equal to 60, just for a brown value. And let's initialize another value that will hold our Celsius value. We don't need to initialize that here. We can initialize it later. So we can set Celsius to be equal to 5/9 multiplied by far minus 32, and that is the formula for Celsius to Fahrenheit conversion. Well, Fahrenheit to Celsius conversion. This way, the other way is just swap it round. That's nothing to do with the Java language. That's just a formula. So that's now setting Celsius to that. So from our first tutorial, we know that system.out.println will print something out to the screen, and we can also, instead of just putting a string in, we can put a variable. Now this is an int, so that's fine. We can put that in. So there we go. So let's see what happens when we run this. 0. And this is a good example because I've left this tiny little part out just now. Java does what's called integer division, which means it truncates to 0 when the value is less than 1. As you can see here, this 5/9 will be less than 1, certainly not 0. And this is getting times by the whole Fahrenheit minus 32. So integer division by Java says that this will be 0, which means anything you times against this will be 0. That means every answer in your program will be wrong. Now that's not a problem, you just need to deal with the fact that Java has integer division. Now, to enable floating point division, all we need to do is add a 0.0 onto one of the terms. This will now convert this into a double. It's given us an error just now because we've got an int Celsius, and it's a double now because we've divided by 9.0. So all we need to do is go up here and change the type to double. That then gets rid of the errors. So let's run this now. And there we go. Now the answer is correct. So now you've seen how variables can be declared, and then assigned in the Java programming language, and you see how these fit into a small program. You've also seen how sometimes you need to change your initial implementation to fit what you need. So in our case, we had to put a 0.0 at the end of this and change the type of the output to double. didn't make any difference to our program output. In the next tutorial, we'll be talking more about strings and string methods, and also formatting of strings. And we'll also be making an improved temperature converter. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope it was helpful. Please don't forget to leave any suggestions, questions in the description box below, and any likes or subscribes would be greatly appreciated. And stay tuned for the next tutorial. Thanks a lot.